Okay, so I want to start really by thinking about Passover in terms of the entire cycle of the Jewish year and what its place is in that cycle. Um, if you think about a hierarchy of holidays, the very top of that hierarchy is Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah to a secondary degree, but the two of them are real, and they are unique in that, unlike the other holidays, they don't really have a historical connection. Yes, Rosh Hashanah could be connected in a sense to the creation of the world or the creation of humanity, but it's not something that we're particularly celebrating. So at the top, and actually above them, certainly the most significant holiday is Shabbat. We tend to forget that because it comes once a week. And I won't say familiarity breeds contempt, but familiarity in this case, we just don't think of it as all that important, despite the fact that it is the only holiday that, according to the Torah, God observes. Right? Um, God rested on the seventh day, called it Shabbat. And it's the only ritual, if you can call it a ritual, that's in the Ten Commandments. So it is extremely important, and its importance really dwarfs that of the other holidays. So Shabbat, Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur, and then we come to the next level, which are the pilgrimage festivals. And there are three of them. They're called pilgrimage festivals because it was traditional, and that actually the Torah requires it for people to make a journey to Jerusalem to celebrate these holidays, to make a pilgrimage. The word Chag is probably related, it's similar to the Arabic word Hajj, right? Hajj is the Muslim pilgrimage to Mecca. And it has to do with a circle, right? You're going somewhere and coming back to the place of origin. So it's a chag. Now, what these three things have in common, and in fact, everything above them in this sequence, that is the three pilgrimage festivals, Passover, Shavuot, and Sukkot, and then Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Shabbat are all major holidays in the sense that one does not work on these days. And that separates them from everything else. Hanukkah is more minor, Purim is more minor, and then there are other days that are really even more minor than that. I won't even mention. So in the hierarchy of holidays, very important. And let's talk about now how they're structured in the year. I want to maintain that there are really two holiday seasons in Judaism. So if you look at the mega level, the 5,000 feet level looking down, you have a fall holiday and a spring holiday. That's really it. Now, they last for quite a while. The fall holidays really begin with Rosh Hashanah, even a little bit earlier if you think about the month of Elul, which comes before it. And then it culminates at the end of Sukkot, which is a harvest festival. And then the last day of Sukkot, according to rabbinic tradition, we also have Simchat Torah, a celebration of Torah. So it's a harvest festival in the fall. It's agricultural, right? It has a historical connection, as the three festivals all do. The one in the fall is about the wanderings of our people in the wilderness, symbolize that with the sukkah, right? And it culminates in a Torah festival. So let's look at the spring, and that's where we are in the spring, Pesach. So Pesach is the beginning of what is really the spring holiday period. It is the first of the spring harvests, so it has that agricultural connection. And it continues and is linked to the holiday which follows it, which is Shavuot, which is the latter harvest. And Shavuot is also the anniversary of the giving of the Torah. So we have a long agricultural holiday crowned by the Torah in the fall, and then right, so that's the sort of the overview of the cycle. Now, Pesach is actually it actually has a lot of different names. And those different names, in some ways, speak to different aspects of the holiday. And one of them is Hag HaAviv, meaning the holiday of spring. And it's called that in very traditional sources because it is about the spring harvest. But the fact that it's called the holiday of spring means it has to occur in the spring. Now, that is actually not easy if you use a lunar calendar. And that's what the Jewish calendar is. The lunar calendar, right? The first of each month is the new moon, the 15th is the full moon, and so on. So we have a lunar calendar. The problem with a lunar calendar is it's actually only 354 days. And then it starts again after 354 days. So compare it to the solar calendar, each year, any given date will be 11 days earlier than the year preceding it. So if we say the first of Nisan, right, the month of Passover, would occur, on May 1st, which it doesn't, but let's say it did, May 1st, then the following year, the first of Nisan, right, would occur
11 days.
11 days earlier, right? And so it would go. This is exactly what happens with the Muslim month of Ramadan, right? And that's why Ramadan gets celebrated at different times all during the year. If you're a Muslim and a religious Muslim, you don't like the summer because the days when you fast, and remember that they fast all the time, every day for a month. Sometimes they're in the summer and sometimes they're in the winter, and that means, and you fast beginning at sunup and you end at sundown, much better in the winter, right? Because you just don't have that many hours of daylight. In the summer, it's tough. Ramadan is tough. I was talking to the local imam about this. He likes winter much better. And you also sweat a lot in the summer, right? I mean, so it's hard. Um, you know, one of my colleagues said that they would rather fast on Ramadan for 30 days than fast for 25 hours on Yom Kippur. I personally do not share that view, but one way or another, right? Our calendar wouldn't work if we treated it strictly as a lunar calendar and still maintained that we have Passover as Chag HaAviv, the spring holiday. And so, as you probably know, our calendar is adjusted with an extra month periodically. And that month catches us up, right? And in fact can go beyond. And so we have an extra month, and then we don't, and then we don't, and then we do again, and so on, following a cycle which was calculated years and years ago by the rabbis. It's always the month of Adar, which is the month where Purim falls. Therefore, there is in some months Adar 1 and Adar 2. Right? So that's how we fix it. And that's why, by the way, for the same reason, Rosh Hashanah sometimes comes at the beginning of September and sometimes it comes at the end of September. The beginning of September because there wasn't a second Adar recently. The end of September because there was, right? People say to me, oh, is the holiday early or late? It comes right after, it comes way after Labor Day, to which I say Labor Day is early this year because it all depends, on your frame of reference. And I prefer to take the Jewish calendar as my frame of reference, but I certainly understand why people don't. So it's called Chag HaAviv. It's also called Chag HaPesach, Pesach, Passover, right? It's called Chag HaMatzot, the holiday of matzahs, right? And one more I'll come to. So the thing about Pesach and the holiday of matzahs, if you look at the book of Exodus carefully, they're really two different holidays. For us, they've been combined as one, but Pesach was originally just the first day of the holiday. Why? That's when the Pesach, that is the Paschal lamb, was slaughtered, right? And that is the commemoration of the beginning of the Exodus. And so, and that's when we have the seder, and we do things that, though that we don't do the lamb anymore, we do things like that. And that really flowed into a second holiday, which was the holiday of matzah, Hag HaMatzot. Today, it's all one. We call the whole thing Pesach. We tend not to refer to it as Hag HaMatzot, though we certainly know it is. And the last holiday, or last name for the holiday, is Zman Cherutenu, the time of our freedom, our redemption, however you want to look at it. And that really ties specifically to the historical moment when we are redeemed from Egypt. So a bunch of different names, each one reflecting, in some sense, a different aspect of the holiday of Passover. So now what I want to do, I'm going to pause for just a minute, and then I want to go begin to look at how Pesach is meant to be celebrated. Before I do, if there are any questions about any stuff having to do with holidays in general or aspects of this holiday, feel free.
Rabbi One Flash,
Yes.
how, according to Jewish sources, how old is the Torah?
How old is the Torah? Well, so that becomes this is a similar question to a question that was once asked a colleague of mine. He called the Jewish Publication Society, this was years and years ago, and he asked them, he wanted a copy of the Torah, right, which is their translation of the Torah. And the person on the other end said, author?
I get it.
It's one of those questions. We know, I mean, most scholars today see the Torah as a compendium of different sources that were ultimately put together later. It's clear that some of those sources are very, very ancient, and probably do go back to the 12th century before the Common Era, a long time ago, 3,000 years ago. Others are clearly later. Scholars, debate whether there were multiple sources, when sources might have come into being, all of that, when the book might have been put together. According to tradition, at least the Ten Commandments and the laws in the code immediately following it, Mishpatim, really were given by Moses on Sinai. And then there are traditions that go further and say the whole Torah was given by Moses on Sinai, a claim which I find extremely dubious, because then Moses would have known at that moment everything that was going to happen to him afterwards. Why would he send scouts out into the promised land if he knew for sure that they would come back and their report would cause everybody to be stuck in the wilderness for 40 years until a generation died out? It doesn't seem tenable. But it is, as a matter of faith, what you'll hear within the Orthodox community. And part of that, I think, is because, and they're following rabbinic tradition, the tradition wants to see all of it as being given by God and therefore completely binding. The other way to look at it is it all comes from God, but not in the same moment. One is these two ways of looking at it. One is called Torah Misinai, Torah from Sinai. The other one is Torah Mina Shemayim, Torah from heaven. That is the Torah through one means or another comes to us from God.
All right, thank you.
It is therefore there for us to interpret, to discern God's will. Okay, I don't want to get too far afield on this, so I'll leave it there. Anything else before we move on? Okay, so let's talk about how Pesach is observed. So there are two things that we are supposed to do. One is to eat matzah. The other is to get rid of any chametz in our house. And the prohibition on chametz, which I'm going to define in a minute, the prohibition on chametz is so strict. You're not supposed to eat it. You're not supposed to own it. You're not supposed to even see it. It's very difficult, right? And that all comes from the Torah itself. You are supposed to, remove it. No chametz should be seen in your homes. Now, I have to say, by the way, in biblical times, this was much easier, right? I mean, how many possessions did they have, right? And undoubtedly, the dishes that they had were ceramic, and they break anyway, and you get rid of them, and you get some more dishes, and you're kind of good. Unfortunately for my wife, who's a ceramic artist, it doesn't work that way anymore. People don't need to buy new pottery every year. But be that as it may, for us, it's a somewhat difficult process. And so, how do we deal with it? And before I say how we deal with it, let's talk about what is chametz. So, and people have this idea that chametz is leavening, right? Which, anything that rises is chametz, and that's not the case. Chametz is a mixture of one of 5 grains with water that has been allowed to rise for more than 18 minutes. It's a very technical definition. Take wheat, rye, spelt, millet, or barley, mix it with water, and let it rise. If you don't stop it at 18 minutes, including baking it, which stops it, if you don't do that, then it's chametz. If it goes for 20 minutes, mix the water in, let it go for 20 minutes, and then bake it, it's chametz. Robin, yes.
Can you just repeat what those 5 were? I got millet, wheat, barley.
5 grains: wheat, rye, spelt, millet, and barley.
Thank you.
And that means, by the way, that matzah can be made from any of those 5 grains. Right? You just mix them with water and you make sure that it doesn't, from the beginning of the process to the end of the baking isn't more than 18 minutes. People used to come to me years ago and they would say, someone in my family has a very serious wheat allergy. Very serious, right? What can they do? And it used to be that this was a difficult question. It's not a difficult question anymore because you can go to the store and find spelt matzah. Spelt is one of the 5 grains, right? It has no gluten. Right? And so if it was prepared as matzah within the right time frame, it's fine, right? So the gluten-free movement has been good for the Jews, at least around this particular issue. Okay, so matzah is one of those things, any of those grains mixed with water and allowed to ferment or to rise for more than 18 minutes. Chametz is any of those grains mixed with water that have been allowed to rise more than 18 minutes. Simple. So there is something called, so let me finish about chametz and then we'll talk about matzah. So how do you get rid, now that we know what it is, how do you get rid of the chametz that you own? Well, the first thing is you can try to get rid of it all, everything that's in your house that you can get rid of. And that means getting every bit from every crevice and crack and everything else. It does not mean spring cleaning, which is really important because there are people who go nuts for Passover. And if you want to have a spring cleaning, geh gesund hate, as they say, go ahead. But if all you're concerned with is preparing for Pesach, not necessary. Don't bother going into rooms where you never, ever bring food. Right? So, unless you eat in bed, don't worry about your bedroom. Certainly don't worry about your bathroom. Only worry about a room where you could possibly have eaten. All right, so that's the first thing. Now, some of what we have, we really don't want to get rid of. If you've got a bottle of 25-year-old scotch, right, made for, it's great alcohol, right? Chametz, right? It's a grain, it's been fermented, you can't. So we have a second way of dealing with chametz. We sell it. You find a non-Jewish person who therefore has no obligation to be rid of chametz, and you say, I'd like to sell you all of my chametz. Usually this is done by your rabbi, right? And he goes, and you tell him, Rabbi, sell my chametz. And he goes and he finds a non-Jewish person who is eager to accept this, and they sign a contract. Now, usually the way these contracts work is this. I will sell you my chametz, you say to the non-Jew in a written contract, I sell you my chametz, and the chametz of everybody who's on this list, everybody who's authorized me as their agent to sell their chametz, and I'm going to sell it to you for $10 million with a $1 down, the rest to be paid immediately after the end of Pesach. And somehow, every year they default. Every year, the sale doesn't go through because the final payment is not made. And so immediately after Pesach, it's your chametz again. However, during that period, it doesn't belong to you. Okay, so we get rid of everything we can. If we have chametz that's really kind of valuable, we don't want to throw it out. And you have to, if you're going to do this, you have to separate it out and lock it up and put it somewhere where you can't see it. Because one of the things is you're not allowed to see chametz. It's true, it's somebody else's chametz, but also, they shouldn't have to go through your various kitchen pantries to find it. So you put it together, you lock it up, and say, that belongs to, that guy. Often the synagogue caretaker or a local clergy member, non-Jewish clergy member, however this is arranged. Then, final thing. So you try to get rid of it in your house. You sell what you can't get rid of. And then if that doesn't work, or in addition to that, because we're really looking for overkill here, in addition to that, there is a formula of nullification that you recite. And you recite this year, it would be Thursday night, because your kitchen, your chametz has to be out of your house this year by Friday morning, for a reason I'll explain in a minute. So Thursday night, you look around your whole house, see if you have any chametz, and in order to make it, special. Usually before you look around, you put chametz in various places. So when you go looking, you actually find something, and it's traditional to use a candle and a feather, and it's lovely, especially if you have little kids to do it with. Anyway, so you collect it all and you say a formula, which is all chametz in my possession, whether I've seen it or haven't seen it, whether I know about it or don't know about it, I hereby declare to be hefker. Something that's hefker means no one owns it, or anyone could take it and own it, right? It is like the dust of the earth. Just like no one can own the dust of the earth, no one can own. I can't. No, I'm saying no one owns this. Even if it's in my house, I don't own it. I've declared that I don't own it. It isn't mine. And hefker is an important rabbinic principle in general. If you take something and you put it on your curb, for the trash pickup, somebody comes along and says, hey, I could use that. They're going to take it. And they don't have to worry about taking it because, in a sense, by putting it out there, you have essentially said it's hefker. It's not mine anymore. I don't want it. I'm assuming the garbage will take it and get rid of it, right? So that's the concept here, right? And so we have searched for it, sold it, nullified it. Now, why does this happen Thursday night? Because it needs to be burned, and that when you do it on Friday, you actually burn it. It's a way of reading one of the verses. The word levaer, which is to kind of seek out and remove, can also mean to burn in Hebrew. And so the idea is when you are doing biur chametz, you're seeking it out. There's also, you could read it as an obligation to burn it. It's generally burned on. So it needs to be burned right before the holiday. Now, the problem is right before the holiday would be Shabbos this year. It's because the holiday starts on Saturday night. And so you can't do that. So if you're going to have to do it before, so you're going to have to burn it on Friday, which means you need to be finished with all these searching projects on Thursday night. It's difficult, right? Now, in that context, I would be just for this year, and because we're talking about this process, there's another problem here, and that is you still need chametz for Shabbat. What do you do about that? Because traditionally, Friday night, you need to eat bread. You need to eat chametz at your meal. You say a motzi, you have bread. And the same thing is true for lunch on Shabbat. So there are two ways of dealing with this. One way is that you keep your bread absolutely separate. And when you eat it, you make sure whatever crumbs are there, you pick up, and people generally flush them down the toilet. So that's one way to do it. If you're going to do it that way, by the way, when you sell your chametz, since it's going to be sold at Friday, you need to specify, except for this. I sell all my chametz except for this. That's a cumbersome process. So there is another way to go, and that is egg matzah. Egg matzah is not actually matzah. It's also got some fruit juice in it. And therefore, it is, in a sense, a kind of bread, but not matzah, and therefore not chametz. So what most people do these days is they use egg matzah on Friday night and for lunch on Shabbat. Now, there is a tradition, I know I'm getting into the weeds here, but there's a tradition not to eat matzah on the day of the seder at night, right? And the reason is, the Talmud says, so that you can eat the matzah with a good appetite. Right? I don't know how delicious it is, but the idea, and you're not supposed to eat anything in the afternoon. It should be special for you. but egg matzah doesn't count as matzah. So you can eat that, even though ordinarily you wouldn't eat matzah, right, on the morning or afternoon before Pesach. Okay, so that is really, what's doing with getting rid of all your matzah. Now let's talk about other foods. Oh, before I go to that, I want to mention something else. There is something called shmura matzah. You may well know. You can go to the store these days. It's around $30 a pound. It's made by hand. You can get non-handmade shmura matzah that's cheaper. I love shmura matzah because it's handmade. It's big, round thing. It's always burnt and tastes terrible, but that's beside the point. So what is shmura matzah? It's not just that it's handmade. Shmirah means to guard. So that means that from the time the wheat is harvested until it's made into matzah, it has been guarded in some sense. It's put somewhere, people check on it, right? So that no water could have possibly gotten mixed with the flour accidentally before they got to make the matzah. And therefore, it would have actually been mixed for more than 18 minutes. Now, this is really not something to be worried about. It's not something that really happens, but just in case, right? So there are people who only eat shmura matzah because of that, because they want to be extra, extra careful, right? The same people generally will not eat wet matzah during Passover. What does that mean? It means matzah balls. It means matzah brai. Anything where you've mixed and made matzah wet, because perhaps, maybe, possibly some of the flour in the matzah didn't completely mix with water. And so when you put it, let's say, you put it in your soup, maybe it'll absorb some water and it'll start to rise. And that's a problem, right? And so they don't eat what's called gebrux. Gebrux, Yiddish words, tells you not so old, if the word is Yiddish. They don't eat gebrux. They don't even eat egg matzah. So, this is a very, rarefied part of the Orthodox world. Okay, so that's more or less it on gebrux. Okay, so let's talk about what you can eat in general, assuming it doesn't have matzah. So there is a major divide in the Jewish world, traditionally between Eastern European, Jews of Eastern European origin, who are known as Ashkenazic Jews, and Sephardic Jews, who are originally, that community came from Spain and was dispersed throughout the Mediterranean. Ashkenazic Jews don't eat something called kitniot. What are kitniot? They are beans, rice, and other things which are not from the 5 grains, that if you mix them with water, you make, could become chametz if it's not baked within 18 minutes. They're not one of those, but they swell up. And so there is this tradition of not eating them among Ashkenazic Jews. Sephardic Jews have no problem serving beans and rice at their seder. The classical commentaries, going back hundreds of years, have said that this is crazy. It's not chametz. But they also say something like, minhag avotenu biyadenu, our ancestors' traditions are in our hands, we may not change them. My father did it, his father did it, his father did it. Hundreds of years, they haven't eaten this stuff. Who am I to say, even though it was a mistaken tradition, who am I not to do? And all that was the case, at least for conservative Jews, until the conservative movement, first in Israel and then around the world, decided, you know, enough is enough. Perfectly fine to eat these foods on Pesach, and I'm so grateful. Can't tell you, especially since we have a vegetarian household. And if you don't eat meat on Pesach and you don't eat beans and rice, it becomes a very limited diet. Okay, so that's that. And if you go to a kosher supermarket, and Robin, I'll take your question in a half second. If you go to a kosher supermarket today, you will find a section that will say for people who eat kitniot. And you can find there, for example, hummus for Pesach, right? Because there's nothing in the hummus. Sesame, fine. Chickpeas, fine, right? So no problem. Okay, now one more extremely technical thing actually is extremely surprising. And that is that, well, no, first of all, Robin, go ahead.
Sorry, I was going to just add, what about corn, peas, soybeans?
Corn, peas, all of that is kitniot. And as far as I'm concerned, it's fine to eat. Absolutely fine to eat.
Thanks.
You can use corn oil, no problem. You can use corn on the cob. You can use frozen corn. Now, there is this. There's something in general. There's a principle, which is the principle of 1/60th, or known as bittul b'shishim, which is that if you don't intend it, and something forbidden falls into something permitted, and it's what falls in is less than a 60th of the total volume, right? If that happens, and it doesn't give any flavor, it's as if it isn't there at all. Right? It's nullified. Bittul means nullified. So 1/60th or less. So let's assume, to give you an ordinary example, you're cooking and you're making something meat and a drop of milk happens to fall in. No problem. Assuming it's less than a 60th, doesn't give any flavor, didn't intend it. It's as if it isn't there. And that applies to everything except chametz. Chametz, no matter how small the amount is that gets mixed in, the whole thing is chametz. So what does that mean? It means the following. Let's assume that you go and you buy a product before Passover. And there's no chametz in the ingredients. It's not something intentionally there. Right? The manufacturer didn't put it in, right? But who knows, right? The thing is, if you before Pesach, if it isn't there, it's nullified by the rule of 1/60th. So it's not there. So if you go and you buy a product before Passover, even though it's not marked kosher for Passover, any possible chametz in it doesn't exist. And therefore you can use it on Passover. You want to use olive oil on Passover? Buy it before. Don't worry about it, whether it's kosher for Passover or not. There's nothing intentionally put in it that's chametz. No problem. You don't need a hechsher. You don't need a hechsher on. You don't need anyone to say that it's kosher for Passover on most dairy products that don't have additives in them, right? Just plain dairy products. You don't need it. You don't need it on coffee. You don't need it on a whole host of things. As long as there's nothing intentionally put in that is chametz, it's nullified, which means, quote, it doesn't exist. But If you buy the same thing during Pesach, well, it might have been put in there. Now, I would say if you buy it the day after the holiday begins, I don't understand how it could have been manufactured except before the holiday, but nonetheless, that's the rule. Okay, so it's a weird technicality, like the idea that you can sell your chametz to someone else. It's a kind of weird technicality, but it allows for Passover to be much less difficult and much less expensive, right? If you got to go get kosher LePesach olive oil, it's going to be more money, or it's not going to be very good oil, right? So, okay. So I'm going to stop here at this point before I move on to talk about the seder itself. Any questions up to now? Okay, Francesca, Sandy, Saul. I can't hear.
Get on mute. I had to get on mute. So I make my own salad dressing, as you know. And one of the things I put in it is Worcestershire sauce. Is that something I can have during Passover or not?
I don't know. You'd have to read the ingredients.
There's another one that I make that's with rice vinegar, and that I can use.
Yeah, rice vinegar is fine.
That I know.
I don't know
That we're
about,
doing kidney oat.
I really don't. I don't know what's in it. There. I'll give you an example of something like that. And I'm not positive about this. I'm going to go look into it. Can't use soy sauce on Passover.
Unless it's
The
kosher for
soy sauce
Passover.
has wheat in it. But tamari, right,
Tomorrow I
which is
can
a
use.
form of soy sauce, has no wheat in it, right? I don't know what else is in tamari, but in theory, if you buy tamari before and there's nothing else in it, probably use it on Pesach.
That's good to know. Okay,
So
thank you.
that's an example of the kind of thing I was talking about. Who did I say was next? Saul, go ahead, and then Sandy.
I think I read in the Shulchan Aruch that you're not supposed to eat matzah between Purim and Pesach. So deal.
Yeah, that is a stringency that most people do not follow. It's about a month. The Talmud itself talks about the day before. The Talmud also actually says something that's pretty funny. It says a person who eats matzah on the eve of Pesach, right, the day before, is like someone who has sex with their fiance in their father's house before the wedding. Right? You're rushing it. You need to that extra level of enjoyment going to come on the day. So I anyway. Um, look, I don't I don't eat matzah the rest of the year for that reason, but I know people who eat it all the time, and I think the idea of not eating it for a month before makes sense, but it's not legally required. Sandy.
So, Rabbi, when you said this year, because the first Seder is Saturday night, on Friday night, it's okay to eat egg matzah. Did you mean egg matzah that's kosher for Passover?
Yes, because you don't want it in your house. I mean, you then if it's not kosher for Passover, you have the same problem. You have the crumbs and everything else, right? So you would want kosher for Passover egg matzah. Easy. Hannah.
Yeah, I believe there's a difference with Sephardic Jews. My grandmother was Greek, married to a Turkish guy, and we always allowed kitniot at Pesach.
Right? That's what I said. Yes. Yeah, no, I think kitniot are great. Terrific. Okay. Anybody else? I'm going to now do I'm going to do a 10-minute Seder. I want to go over very quickly what I think the Seder is. And I want to say that I think, and maybe there are more, but I think there are four levels, four things that are going on simultaneously at the Seder. The first is passing the memory of the Exodus from generation to generation, right? actually 4 times in the Torah, it says on that day, the day of Passover, you should tell your children about the Exodus from Egypt. 4 times. And so it becomes clear that that is one of the main, and the people are being told about it even before it happens, which is really striking, right? So you have this, put the blood on your doorposts, and later on, when your children say, what is the meaning of that? Presumably they continue to do this for a while. You should say, this is because of what God did for me when God took me out of Egypt. Right? So that's one very basic thing. That's and it's supposed to be done in the form of a dialogue, questions and answers. Your kid's supposed to ask you something and you answer it. Right? That's the best way to learn, really, is in response to a question. And so the Seder is structured in some ways in order to get kids to ask questions. A lot of this is, we see it, the 4 questions really were not originally questions, they were kind of observations. The kid's supposed to ask a question. If the kid asks a question, you're good. If they don't ask a question, you could point out certain things like, hey, what we're eating before we even have the food, we're eating parsley. What's that about? Right? Anything really, in order to elicit an answer. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt, and so on. Right? So that's the first thing. The second thing is and we also see one other thing about that. You know, that little section about the 4 children, one who was wise, one, right? All of that is based around the fact 4 times it says talk about the Exodus from Egypt to your kids, but it's also important. It's sort of a message for the leader of the Seder. Don't just think by saying, these words that you have fulfilled your obligation to teach your kids about the Exodus, to pass it on, because there are all kinds of children, and you have to talk to them on their level. Different kinds of learners, right? You need to speak to them in a way they will understand. And of course, it's not just the kids. We have to review it ourselves. Even if we were all wise, it would still be our obligation, and so on. Okay, so that's level 1. Level 2 is the idea of re-experiencing the Exodus. So we go from bitterness to sweetness, right? We got to eat that maror, that bitter taste, right? In every generation, each person should see themselves as if they went out of Egypt, right? So all of that really we see there. We see it in the way we begin the Seder, halach ma'anya, right? This is the bread of affliction which our ancestors ate in the land of Mitzrayim, right? Pointing at the matzah. This matzah, that's what they ate a long time ago. But by the end of that paragraph, we're saying, now we are slaves, next year may we be free. Right? In other words, through the lens of the matzah, we have traveled back in time. The matzah is what enables us to connect with our ancestors. I always felt like this would be, if it was a movie, the camera would move in on the matzah. The family is sitting around the table. The camera comes in on the matzah, gets all blurry. And when it goes out, you see a bunch of slaves in Egypt, right? So that is the idea of re-experiencing it. The third level is, it is a dinner in God's honor. It's like a testimonial dinner in which we are grateful to God and we express our gratitude to God for our redemption. That's probably why Moses is not mentioned in the Haggadah. It's not about Moses. In that sense, it's not about history entirely, because Moses is a big player, but Moses is only, doing what God tells him to do. So and how do we do that? We list all the things that God did for us. If you had taken us out of Egypt and not led us to the sea, that would have been great. Look at all the things that God has done. And some of them are even nonsensical, right? If you split the sea, but not have us walk through on dry land. It would have been enough. Ridiculous, right? The whole need is split the sea so we can go through on dry land. But the idea is we're trying to find as many different things as possible that we can tell God that we are grateful for. And so you get these odd things in the Seder that are attempts to do that, like how many plagues were there? Well, yeah, were there 10 plagues? No, because it was the hand of God. So 5 times 10, there were 50, and so on. All of this is about trying to find ways to express the miraculous nature of what God did for us. Okay. And the final level, right? We've talked about transmission, we talked about re-experience, we talked about thanking God. And the last level, and this is important, and it often gets overlooked because people stop with the meal and they don't go on. Or they finish the meal and then they go on a little bit. The first half of the Seder is about the past, what God did for us. The second half of the Seder is what we want God to do for us. The second half of the Seder is our plea that God should send the Messiah so that in every generation they will not continue to persecute us. Right? And who is the harbinger of the Messiah? According to tradition, it's Elijah. And so we open the door for Elijah, right? We come on in. We want this to get going, right? It's all a plea. It's a messianic plea. That redemption we're grateful for, that was a physical redemption. What about a spiritual redemption? What about an end to the need for redemption? All right. And so it is, the Seder is poised between past and future. It expresses gratitude on the one hand, but on the other hand, what have you done for us lately? That's kind of the second half of the Seder, and the urgent need for God to do it. Okay, so with that, and I could say much more about the Seder, but we are pretty much out of time. I will go over a little bit. Any questions anybody has about any of this or anything you wondered about in the Seder or anything else?
Rabbi, if I may, I have your notes from 2022. And I must tell you, you've deviated from your notes. You've gone on. The big word in 2022 was portal.
Portal. Yes, the matza is a kind of portal.
Portal. That was your big word then.
I learned that from one of my students. I was teaching a kid who I was talking about Passover, and I said this about the matzah, and he looked up and he said, "The matzah is a portal."
That's it.
Exactly right.
Okay. All right.
I picked these things. I forgot to mention it, but my rabbi, the rabbi here this past Shabbat, who talked a little bit about this idea of nullification and 1/60th, he said, and if it's less than a 60th, poof, it disappears. I like that.
Okay. I have this insight which I want to share with you and the other people in the class that I think is justified, but I want to get your take on it. My feeling is the Haggadah developed over time. It was not a complete work. The prayers came in at different points in the history of the Jewish people. And therefore, that explains the discontinuity between certain aspects of the service. So what I'm trying to say is, I think it's revealing to discuss why certain prayers are in the Haggadah in terms of the historical period that the Jews were in.
You
I'm
got it.
trying. Yeah, I'm searching
No, I
for.
think I understand.
Right,
So yes, first of all, the Haggadah is an anthology, right? And it contains things that from centuries, different
right.
centuries. Some of it is quite late, maybe the 16th, 17th century. Some of it goes all the way back before rabbinic times to when the temple was still standing. So yeah, it is interesting to look and to try to figure out what came when, and there's a fair amount of scholarship on that.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a legitimate insight.
Oh, and it's a legitimate insight, and I would go further. It means that our bringing our own texts to the Seder is completely legitimate. They're not add-ons in the sense of, well, it's kind of boring. I want to do something else. But it is what our ancestors have always done. I would say this also. The worst thing, in my opinion, though many people do it, the worst thing you can do at a Passover Seder is treat the Haggadah like it's a prayer book and just sort of daven it.
Right.
You go around the table and everybody says the words and you're done without discussing it, getting into it, because that's what it's about. It's not a prayer book. It's meant to be a springboard for discussion. And if you haven't done that, I don't think you've really done a Seder. The Seder is actually modeled after something that existed in the rabbinic world, the Roman world, which was a symposium. And a symposium was a meal around a topic with symbolic foods. This is our symposium, and it's about the Exodus from Egypt. And a symposium was a place where you talked, right? And what we find in the Haggadah is just meant to stimulate that conversation.
Thank you.
And that, rather than saying every word, I think, is the most important.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Anything else? Anybody else?
I have another question.
Right.
Okay, I got another question, completely different question. At the just before the festive meal, we eat the maror,
Yes.
we eat the matzah and the maror, and then we eat the matzah, the maror, and the charoset, the korech of Hillel, the sandwich of Hillel.
So I want to correct what you said.
Go ahead.
Okay. So we eat the matzah, clearly.
Right.
We eat the maror and the charoset.
Oh, the maror and the charoset.
Right. The charoset is meant to go with the maror whenever you eat. The charoset is not a mitzvah in itself. It's a way of eating. It's actually something you dip maror into. Now, the way we make charoset these days would be hard to dip the maror. Although one form of maror is bitter lettuce. And sometimes we'll take a leaf, in my seder, we'll take a leaf of lettuce, bitter lettuce, though. It's got to be maror, bitter. And you put, so you could use radicchio, for example. And you put inside the leaf itself, you can put charoset and eat it. And then the third time around, you make a sandwich. Now we have the matzah and the maror, which also has charoset accompanying it, together. And because the Torah says we're supposed to eat matzah and maror and the paschal lamb together. Pesach, matzah, and maror. Now we don't eat the paschal lamb anymore.
Right.
So what do? So one piece of matzah symbolizes the paschal lamb. And there's a piece of matzah that's matzah, and then there's the maror.
And that's the Hillel sandwich.
That's the Hillel sandwich. It's not really a mitzvah as such. There's no blessing said over it. We're simply maintaining a tradition that goes back to the rabbinic period.
Thank you. Okay.
If you didn't do the sandwich, you still you've still fulfilled all the mitzvot.
because no one says that the matzah can be a substitute for the Paschal lamb.
Well, actually, the matzah as a substitute for the Paschal lamb also plays out in another place, and that is the afikomen. That last piece of matzah, I'm not talking about the gift you give the kids. The last piece of matzah, right, is the Paschal lamb was supposed to be the last thing you ate when you're sort of full, right?
Right.
And so we don't have the Paschal lamb anymore. So we eat a final piece of matzah called the afikomen to represent the lamb again. Okay, anything else? Okay, no class next week. Back to Genesis the week after.
Could I get one more question in? I'm a pain in the butt, but I haven't seen you in so long. I'm making up for lost time. Let me ask you a question. Do you have any gimmicks or any methods or any tricks in getting people, once they have finished the meal, to come back for the second part of the seder?
Right.
Because I find, go
yeah, it's very hard to get people to. I mean, that's one of the reasons we have all those songs. Is it can engage people. I think the main thing, if you're going to do it, if you want to pick up that, and you can't get people otherwise, at least open the door for Elijah.
Okay.
Because that is symbolic of the messianic piece of the Seder.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, everybody, for tolerating my questions.
Good to see you all. Kosher v'sameach, a happy
everybody.
Passover. And I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.